So speaking of L Blender, that's a callback from a video I made last week, 2 weeks ago, where we were reacting to a TikToker who was just lying about Che Guevara, saying that he was like this mass murderer, he was like this virulent racist who hated black people, hated gay people, and the historical record just does not agree with those claims. He risked his life to help people in the Congo to fight in a revolution. That's not typically something someone would do if they were a virulent anti-black racist. He was infamous for writing letters and saying, hey, this revolution in Cuba is going to put an end to racial prejudice and racial compartmentalization. He and Castro ended segregation in public and private life. The historical record just does not agree with the accusations against Che Guevara, and I proved that in the last video. But that individual, I believe his name was the Sagnik Basu, who is a political operative. He is a center-right to right-wing, maybe conservative. I don't know what the fuck this guy is. He's a fucking TikToker or Instagram reeler, and he posts slop. He posts terrible political slop. Probably has never opened a book in his life. And, you know, I've become quite fond of him. I deem him actually a friend because he gives me the ability to make that precious, sweet content. And that's what we do over here. That's what we do on the Underzealots channel. On the Overzealots channel, we take months to make very detailed and rigorously researched video essays. But on the Underzealots channel, we do the fucking slop. We get that low-hanging fruit and we make tons of money. And we pretend to be socialist when we're actually super, super rich and we're capitalists. We're secretly capitalists and super rich and hoard wealth and do stonks and Dow Jones. We do Dow Jones. Your main channel takes way longer than a 5-year plan of any country. Okay, I'm sorry. Because I feel like I only have one chance to really say my piece on a certain topic. That's why I get so obsessed with the details and I take so fucking long. But the next video, I promise, I'm going to start writing the script in at least a week, okay? I've acquired a ton of knowledge about the Yom Kippur War. I had a good amount of knowledge going into it, but now I'm very, very confident that I could make at least a 30 to 45 minute video on the Yom Kippur War. Okay, and that's coming soon. But today, we're doing the slop. We're getting into the slop. We have friend of the show, the Sagnik Basu, with another absolute banger, incredible political analysis. Let's hear him out. This video is about how socialism is actually just for rich kids. That's the premise. And you know, maybe he's right. Maybe he's right and I'm just too mean to him.
Notice that college kids moving to big cities want a revolution. But champagne socialism is not new. All of their heroes come from money. Karl Marx, his friend, was paying his bills. He was a rich factory owner. Che Guevara, he was a medical student from a rich family. Mao, he was a son of a wealthy granary owner. And just like that.
It's so funny because like, the fact that they came from money and still decided to forego a comfy, privileged life to fight for a more equitable political model, that's not the own that you think it is, brother. What do you want them to do? Do you want them to just say, oh wow, I'm rich. Now I'm going to just cozy into my position as someone who exploits the working class. Would that be better? Would that be like a better solution for these people? It's just funny that he said Marx's friend was paying his bills or whatever. Marx's friend has a name and is actually kind of important when it comes to Marxism, right? Marx's discography is like Marx and Engels for a lot of the works, right? The first Das Kapital was Marx, but the Communist Manifesto, that's Engels as well. Like Engels is a very important figure. It's kind of weird to just be like Marx's friend, who we actually don't know the name of because he's not a very important political figure. He was actually paying for Marx's blah, 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 and he owned a factory. Yeah, bro, we fucking know. Do you think they hid this? Do you think you're uncovering some like knowledge that nobody knew? We fucking know. That's kind of the whole meme about Marx, was that he was like, you know, sucking on the teat of Engels. That's the joke. That's the meme. He read a tweet and was like, oh my God, Marx's friend paid for stuff for him? Owned a factory? This is a revelation. And then he made this video. We know, bro. What did you want them to do? Did you want them to just solidify their position as someone who owns the capital and coerces people to operate said capital? Is that what you wanted them to do, to just kind of cozy into that position? Because I would say there's more honor in being a class traitor that way, born into a privileged class, into the ruling class, and then saying, I'm going to be a traitor downwards. It's just funny, like these people who hate socialists and socialism, they really need to sell this idea that socialism is actually just a rich man's sport. It's something that rich people fancy themselves with. But we'll get to this point later. How do you think socialism has taken root in so many countries? Do you think it has taken root because like a small, wealthy portion of the population has pushed for it? Or do you think it's been an ideology that the masses have been receptive to? Because if it's the former, that makes no sense. The only reason that socialism has gotten off the ground in countries that are, say, primarily agrarian peasantries is because it appealed to them. It appealed to them. It had to have appealed to them. It couldn't have just been a rich man's sport because there's not enough rich men to carry out a mass uprising. You need the masses. That's the whole point of socialism. If everyone was just a fucking rich kid, a rich college kid, not that that's a problem, but if everyone was just a rich kid and that was the backbone of socialism, how do you account for the Chinese Revolution? Do you think the peasantry that made up the backbone of the Chinese Revolution was just actually secretly all like rich kids who loved Zoran Mamdani? This makes no sense. Do you think the Cuban Revolution was just made up by rich people? Do you think that they made up the masses of that revolution? Yes, Castro came from a wealthy family. Che Guevara came from a wealthy family. When I hear these things and hear that these people who came from a wealthy family were able to put that aside and help spark a mass movement that looked out for the interests of the masses and uplifted the living conditions of the masses and limited that exploitation that was taking place specifically in Cuba from American companies and the mafia and all of these capitalists, and instead said, no, we are going to work towards an equitable society that cares for the masses, the peasantry. We're going to work towards vaccination campaigns. We're going to eradicate diphtheria, rubella, malaria, which they all did in a very short period of time. I think there's more honor in that. How do you think those movements get taken off the ground? Do you think they get taken off the ground because they don't have mass support? Or do they have mass support? That's how they work. If they didn't have the support of the peasantry, they wouldn't have worked. And it's so funny too, because like in the case of Castro like expropriated his own family's land too, right? Like the idea, this myth, this stereotype that socialism is just actually a rich man's sport. And then when the socialist politicians or the socialist leaders acquire power, they actually secretly immediately turn their backs on the masses and they only work to enrich themselves. This is not true. Castro appropriated his family's land too. It's not like his family was exempt from the land reforms. It's very silly.
Similarly, Zoran's base is college-educated elite transplants. Check this out. She was plugged by Zoran. She won the area right by Columbia.
Sorry for pausing again so quickly, but it's so funny because the base of the arguments that this guy's making, and a lot of like anti-socialist critics make, is that socialists, despite secretly being rich themselves, apply some sort of like moral judgment on people who are rich, that they think it's just morally wrong, that it's a moral assessment, when that's actually not the case. Like he's framing it as though, oh, look at me, I'm using socialists' own logic, and they hate rich people because they think it's immoral, and then look at them, they're actually all rich. That's not what Marxists believe. Marxists don't typically apply a moral judgment on people for being rich. The whole theory is based on the inevitability of contradictions eventually causing capitalism to become obsolete and give way to socialism and then communism as the final mode of production. It's not a moral argument as this guy clearly thinks it is. It's a materialist one. That's what differentiates Marx and Engels from the previous iterations of socialism, right? Marx and Engels fancied themselves scientific socialists. They didn't believe that they were offering a moral prescription. They thought that they were putting forth a theory that answered for the inevitable result of the contradictions that capitalism encompasses. This is what happens when you don't actually read the theory and then you levy critiques against socialism as though you know it better than the people who actually adhere to it. Because if he was actually familiar with what the theory states, there's not all of these moral prescriptions being levied like, oh, how dare you be rich? That means you're a terrible person. That's not what the theory states. That's not what the theory puts forth. The whole point of dialectics is that in the case of capitalism, the contradictions are so sharp, the interests of the working class and the interests of the ruling class are incompatible and eventually will nudge together so much that they create a new path forward. The thesis, the antithesis, and then the synthesis. There's something new that is made. That's what the theory posits. It's not that, oh, all these rich people are bad people. That's not what people think. If that was the case, then why would we herald, Che Guevara and Fidel Castro and Engels? We obviously can look past it in certain instances. It's not because we think that they're terrible people.
Columbia, where rich kids go to school. She moved to New York to go to Columbia herself, got radicalized, and became a Zoran groupie. Many such cases.
It's so funny too, because like he's framing like the DSA candidates, like the Zorans and all that, as though they're like crazy radical socialists. Rather, these are social democrats. These are social democrats. These are not radicals by any means. Everybody thinks they're a radical until a real motherfucker pulls up. Could you imagine if this guy had to see like a real radical? I think he would piss and shit himself.
Meanwhile, her opponent...
I think this guy actually thinks that there's no difference between Che Guevara and Zoran Mamdani. Like, he just thinks it's all the same shit.
Was a literal immigrant. He got votes from the low-income New Yorkers, but not the student.
Oh my God, this is liberal identity politics. Okay, so like the immigrant guy happened to be like a shitty dude, and the non-immigrant person was not a shitty person? Is that not something that could possibly happen? He's like doing woke reactionary shit right now. There was this article, I think it was Humberto Fontova, who is this anti-Cuban expat propagandist, and he did an interview with Fox News, and he literally said in that interview, Che Guevara and Castro, they were white and they overthrew the mixed-raced Batista. He was like, how dare they overthrow Batista? He was mixed race and he got overthrown by 2 white boys. And it's like, first of all, Batista killed a larger portion of the Cuban population than the proportion of Americans who died in both world wars. Who cares if he was part black, dude? He was a bad guy. I gotta find that interview for you guys. It's so funny. Okay, so this is an article. It's called 5 Inconvenient Truths About Che Guevara. It's by Maxime Lott of Fox News. And I think he is citing Humberto Fontova or talking to Humberto Fontova here. But look at this. Batista had been considered by many Cubans to be a friend of Cuba's black minority and had elevated several to prominent posts in the government. The lily white Che Guevara and Fidel Castro overthrew the mixed race Batista, Fontova said. He's like, yo, they had a DEI dictator and these lily white crackers deposed him. It's just so funny that these right-wing people who actually don't care about these, like, you know, liberal arguments, they're fucking racists themselves, feel the need to appropriate that language when dealing with left-wingers that they don't like and be like, hey, you guys claim to not be racist, but did you know Che Guevara and Castro, the guys that you like, did you know that the person that he overthrew, who was also a mass murderer and like a disgusting monster, did you know that he was actually mixed race? What is the difference between what this Fox News article is doing and what this guy is doing right now? Okay, newsflash, people from immigrant backgrounds and people who are mixed race, they also have the ability to not be good people. I don't know if you guys ever knew that. That can happen. It's just crazy because instead of contending with any actual, like, you know, literature on the topic, theory on the topic, the argument that this guy stoops to is, did you know that the socialist is not an immigrant? And the person that is opposing the socialist is an immigrant? By your logic, you should be voting for the immigrant. Checkmate, liberals. But it's like, what if the immigrant guy is kind of like a shitty dude? Like that could be possible too, right? You could say that this particular immigrant dude kind of sucks while not hating immigrants the way right-wingers do, the way I'm sure this guy, if not does himself, holds water for people who do. Like, I'm sure this guy defends, well, I know this guy defends right-wingers. Right-wingers in the US are actually genuinely anti-immigrant. They are doing apologia for ICE. I guarantee you this guy at some point has done some sort of apologia for ICE. I would be very shocked if he didn't. And then he goes out and he makes this argument. You socialists are favorable towards the socialist who's not an immigrant and not the not socialist who is an immigrant. Checkmate. Stupid argument. Yeah, I was right. He does have an article defending ICE. But in his usual roundabout way, he frames it as though these silly liberals actually don't know what's best for immigrants, and ICE, contrary to popular belief, actually wants what's best for immigrants and is putting an end to some sort of indentured servitude or exploitative system, which complements the topic of the video that we're dealing with today, where he's literally defending capitalism and championing its persistence, despite the fact that it's an exploitative system.
Activists. He was like, yeah, we don't want to burn this whole thing down. He was too vanilla for a gentrified voting base that increasingly wants a little bit of radical theater. Now look, radical politics doesn't piss me off. I don't know, it's funny, we need crazy people, but what does piss me off is when they
I guarantee this guy, if you want to talk to him about, like, fuck, the American Revolution, the American Revolution would be considered, in its time, a radical act. Not something that I fuck with. I think the American Revolution was repulsive. I think the reason the American Revolution, one of the main reasons that caused the American Revolution was that the American revolutionaries were not content with the restrictions that the metropole placed on them when it came to genociding the natives to the west of the Appalachian mountain range. That was kind of one of the main things, right? So I do not support the American Revolution, but something tells me that if I talk to this person about the American Revolution, he, in that instance, would have no problem with quote-unquote radical politics there. I just think these people say things and use terms without actually knowing what any of it means. How are you going to say that radical politics across the board is bad? But I guarantee you he would not say the American Revolution was bad, which would be considered a radical act. It was a revolution. This is what happens when you're so desperate to, like, gotcha your political adversaries for, like, fucking Instagram reels and TikToks, and you don't actually just kind of sit down and think, like, are the arguments I'm making gonna backfire on me? Do I support quote-unquote radical politics in some ways? I'm sure this guy supports the American Revolution. He has to. I'm pretty sure he works for, like, Washington Post or some shit. Ex-producer for the Washington Post. Okay, he worked for Fox News. He wrote for the Free Press. Bro, this is the guy pretending that he's like super pro-immigrant and is secretly woke. This fucking guy worked for Fox News. Oh my God. I love this guy. It's an infinite content well. I love him. Again, please, can somebody get this guy on the show? I really want to talk to him. Please. I would love that. We can make a whole day out of it. We can have him on chat.
Tend to represent the working class. Actual working class people, they don't want a revolution. They want two things, opportunity and safety. Opportunity comes from money coming into the city, business.
Again, this just kind of goes back to the arguments I was making in the beginning of this segment. How do you think communist revolutions work? How do you think they get off the ground? Do you think that they happen devoid of broad popular support from the workers and the peasantry? That's impossible. The reason communist revolutions have worked in the past is because the masses were rallied and organized. The masses. There's no such thing as the masses that are all fucking rich. That doesn't work. By definition, only a few people are the elite, the rich. They can't be the backbone of a communist revolution or a socialist revolution because there's just not enough of them. You need to rally the peasantry and the workers. So the idea that workers are not responsive to some sort of radical change in the form of, say, socialism or communism, maybe in the case of the US that holds true right now, and we'll get into why that is later, but to paint just working class people across the board with this brush, that's not true. It hasn't held true across the world. The whole point of the Americans launching like their anti-communist crusades across the world is because communism was a very appealing ideology. We'll get into it later, but keep that in mind.
This is hiring them. Safety comes from not getting mugged. That's it. That's all they want. They don't want to burn the system down. While these people, they want a complete revision of the American project.
Yeah, the American project sucks and it's responsible for so much death and destruction around the world. It should be completely revised.
You know, they graduated with a master's degree and realized that they cannot afford.
Bro's entire argument right here is, hey, did you notice that there's a correlation between people who have an education and like socialism and left-wing politics? Brother, introspect a little bit there. Maybe there's something you're missing.
For a studio in Manhattan. Yeah, no shit, New York is expensive. But hey, there's 7.6 million unfilled jobs in America. But no, they don't want those jobs. They want to live in one of the most expensive zip codes ever, and they want a tippy-tappy computer job. Why? Because
does this guy think that everyone who is struggling financially in America is just a rich kid who doesn't want to actually work a job and has a Starbucks Frappuccino and a laptop? Is that what he thinks the epidemic of poverty looks like in America? Actually, funnily enough, this guy is far more sheltered than anybody he's scolding, because if he was actually tapped in with the working class and people who are struggling and stricken with poverty, he would know that that's not what poverty looks like. That's not what poverty looks like in America. It's not what poverty looks like anywhere.
They're entitled to it. The problem is that they're way too educated and way too entitled to start anywhere but the top.
Again, can't have socialist or communist revolution without popular support. I think he thinks that the people who uphold the capitalist system and benefit from it are everyday people, but that's not true. Capitalism is defended by any means by the ultra wealthy, and the political systems of all our wealthy Western countries. That's what upholds capitalism. I mean, just because some working class people support it in the meantime out of a belief that they're temporarily embarrassed millionaires, that doesn't mean capitalism is actually like the true populist position. It just means that, to use the Marxist term, the superstructure has created cultural and societal mechanisms to convince everyday people that capitalism isn't worth trying to change, or in some cases is worth defending. That's what that means. The reason many working class people don't question the existence of capitalism is precisely because of how it seeps into every aspect of our culture, of our media, of our lives, and it aims to subconsciously convince us that its existence is inevitable and good. That's why. That is how you answer to the phenomenon of working class people maybe not yet being drawn to, say, radical politics or socialism yet. There's an entire mechanism, an entire political structure that is in place specifically to prevent people from having that awakening. We think that capitalism should remain, or if we're really feeling feisty in the West, we think it should be reformed, the liberals at least. But the reason that they don't take it to the next step is because deep down, they've been conditioned to believe that capitalism is not going anywhere no matter what, and they just accept that. They accept that. The superstructure has programmed them to accept that and believe it to be an inevitability. It's funny because, again, it's just always the guys who have never read any Marxist literature who have the dumbest fucking takes like this. This whole video is just educated people prefer socialism. All right, what does that tell you about maybe socialism? There's also a long history in the US of separating communist politics or radical politics from organized labor, right? So that could also answer for the fact that working class people maybe aren't jumping at a revolution right now. It's because of years of propaganda and years of them being subconsciously pushed away from it, right? Like you even have legislation like the Taft-Hartley Act that was of 1947, and it literally barred union leaders from being communist. It made them sign affidavits stating that they were not communists. So you have this concerted effort to detach radical politics from union organizing in America. And then this guy has the gall to question why maybe some working class people haven't yet arrived at the position that radical politics or socialist politics might be the answer. Do you think that maybe the many, many, many years of the powers that be separating those two groups of thinking, do you think that that could play a role in why some working class people today haven't yet gotten to that position, to that assessment? It's like you have all of these sources of pressure constantly trying to convince the working class to accept their position on the bottom rung of society, even though they're the ones creating all of the actual wealth for our societies. Capitalism is so pernicious precisely because of how it convinces people not to question it, and it perpetuates itself despite its many contradictions. And then, when mass movements do arise to overthrow capitalism, or even just to reform it to varying degrees sometimes, the imperial machine responsible for the maintenance of capitalism, the US and its allies, pour unlimited resources into killing the revolutionaries and curbing the revolutions, right? That's what happened in Chile, Cuba, Indonesia, Nicaragua, Guatemala, Korea, Vietnam, China, the USSR, Burkina Faso. What do you think was happening here? What do you think was happening here? The US and its allies were exhausting copious resources precisely because the masses of those countries snapped out of it and realized that the capitalist system was the major source of their oppression, and the empire couldn't allow for that realization to go unpunished. The guy you're reacting to probably doesn't even think the working class does anything historically, and they're just zombies who follow elites. Dude, that's the funniest part. This motherfucker works for the Washington Post. He used to work for Fox News. He worked for the Free Press. You're telling me this guy gives a fuck about the working class? Or he gives a fuck about immigrants the way he tried to gesture that he did? The Sagnik Basu, you know I love you, man. You know I'm a huge fan. Please come on the show. I think we can have a very fruitful discussion.